everyone. So today we're going to be talking about something that I enjoy doing, and I'll give you a little bit of a hint here. Okay, I would do a little star. So there's a collection of my artistic works here, and today we're going to be talking about something that continues our day 4 topic, which was increasing focus. But when we did day 4, we talked about physiological ways to increase focus. We talked about diet, and we talked about eating, not just what you ate, but how much. Because if you eat too little, you get hungry and you get distracted, because hunger distracts you. If you eat too much, you tend to get sleepy, and that will definitely increase listening fatigue. And then we also talked about, so diet is really important. We also talked about exercise, because exercise brings blood to the brain and it brings oxygen to the brain, and it makes us more awake and alert, and it can help us increase our focus. So taking stretch breaks, moving around, that sort of thing. And then also even like if we're studying, walking and studying, you see some people walking and studying can actually help increase memorization. And then the other one is sleep. So the quality of sleep, as well as the amount of sleep, not getting too much, not getting too little, can all help us increase our focus. But today we're going to be talking about doodling. And I am a chronic doodler. Especially in class. When I was in class, I was always drawing little flowers on the edges of my test papers, notes, PowerPoint slide printouts that I would get, that the teachers would give us. I was always drawing little flowers, little leaves and plants on the edges of my test papers. And sometimes, not in chiropractic school, but sometimes when you're younger, especially as a student, teachers may get on your case for doodling. And they say, well, you're not paying attention and you're being distracted, and so on. And they get upset with you. Or maybe your boss gets annoyed because you're always doodling in the meeting and they think you're not paying any attention. But doodling actually helps increase our rate of memorization. So in 2009, a psychologist ran an experiment, a little bit of a test, and she took 40 people, and she had these 40 people listen to a very dull voice message. And she didn't tell them what they would be doing other than listening to this voice message. But she had half the people doodle and half the people just had to sit there and listen to the message. And at the end, they had to supply details of the voice message, which they didn't know beforehand that they were going to have to repeat and recall the voice message. The people that doodled, half that were drawing and doodling while they were listening, were actually able to recall 29% more information than the ones who were just sitting there listening. Why is that? I mean, that's a pretty significant increase in memorization, to be able to recall 29%. Why is that? Well, your brain tends to get bored, especially if you're listening to something that you're not really interested in, or it's just going on and on and on. Your brain tends to get bored. And when our brains get bored, they tend to wander off into daydream world. So maybe you're making up your own imaginary scenarios, or rehashing that conversation or the argument you had with someone, or even just thinking about all the stuff that you have to do today. and your brain gets bored and you're daydreaming. And when you're daydreaming, it's all just in one ear, out the other. You're not paying attention. You're not focused on the information that you're getting in through your ears. Doodling allows us, gives us some movement, and it also kind of wakes up the brain without completely taking it away from the information that you're supposed to be focused on. Because doodling is basically a mindless activity. It's not something that you have to concentrate on while doing it. It's not like if you're painting a picture, especially if you're painting a portrait or painting a still life, you have to focus on it. Make sure you get all the details just right. When you're doodling, you don't really have to focus. It's just something that you can do while doing other things, while paying attention to other things, almost like your hand is operating independently of your brain. Obviously, that's not true, but sometimes that's the way it feels like. And we have other examples of this. Think about driving on a highway. I used to drive from Missouri, when I was in school, Missouri to North Carolina. And I was going through Illinois and Kentucky, places that had a lot of farmland. And just driving for hours on end. There's nothing around, just cows, or pastures, or maybe woods. You're maybe not seeing that many other cars, and you've got your car set on cruise control, so you don't even have to worry about the speed. The speed is not changing. It's 60 or 65 on these highways, and there's nothing around, and you're completely zoned out. You're not paying attention, and you get to your final destination, and people say, "How was the trip?" And you can't even really tell them because you weren't paying attention. You really have no idea how you got from point A to point B because your brain was elsewhere. It's the reason why people listen to audiobooks or music while they drive, is because a lot of times if you get too zoned out, then you get sleepy, and that does increase the risk of you falling asleep and crashing. But for a long drive on a highway, or even a place where you've driven 100 times, your daily commute to work, a lot of times you can zone out and your driving becomes automatic. You're not even focused on what you're doing. So this is an example of a mindless activity. Maybe you're making a recipe and you're cooking, doing a recipe you've done 1,000 times, and you're talking to your spouse or your child or a friend or another relative, and you're deeply engaged in the conversation. But in the meantime, you're cutting and you're slicing, you're peeling, and mixing all these things together, and you're not actually thinking about what you're doing. It's a mindless activity. So doodling is also a mindless activity. You can still focus on listening while keeping your brain awake and engaged by doodling. The other thing that doodling helps do is that it gives your brain a break, because especially for us who have hearing loss, listening for an extended period of time can feel like a tidal wave of information, just like swamping over you. Words are just swamping you, and especially when you can't quite make out everything that's being said, your brain is having to fill in the blanks and figure out what you missed, whether that be just some syllables that make it hard to determine what word was said, or whether it was entire sentences that you missed. But you're using context clues and the context of the sentence or the topic of conversation and what everybody else is writing or talking about to figure out what is being said and what is going on, as well as some lip reading, which then makes writing notes very difficult. But doodling gives your brain a little bit of a break, takes your mind off of what's being said just a little bit, not enough that you are not getting what's being said, but just enough to give your brain a little bit of a break. So if your boss, if your teacher gives you a hard time about doodling, you can tell them there's research that shows that doodling does help increase focus and memorization. And I found this information in the Harvard Health blog. So you can tell them Harvard said that doodling is actually beneficial. And no one can really argue with Harvard, right? I think most people know the name of that school, even if you aren't from the US, because it is a pretty famous and well-known school, one of the tops, like Oxford University, for any of those who are familiar with England. You don't have to be from the country to know this school. So yes, doodling is important. The other thing is writing out information by hand, and as opposed to typing. Because typing a lot of times can be a mindless activity. We're just sitting there and we're moving our fingers, and the words are appearing on a computer screen, and we're not really having to focus. And we can, for those of us who can type quickly, sometimes we can type faster than our brain can actually intake the information. So instead of going in the ears and into the brain, it kind of goes in the ears and out through our fingertips. And we're not really processing what's being said. Whereas for most of us, when we're writing, having to write a little slower, and it forces us to think about what is being said. So yes, and then also our hand movement activates the opposite side of the brain. So more as we move our arms, it engages the opposite side of the brain, and it kind of wakens up, makes our brain a little more alert. And then just doing exercise, I showed you the cross crawl to sync up yesterday, to sync up the hemispheres of our brain. That's another way that we can increase focus. So homework today, if you're having to be in a meeting or you're listening to something, a webinar, or doing an online class, try doodling. Try doodling and see if it actually helps keep you more focused on what you're supposed to be paying attention. And then try writing out information by hand. That can be a struggle, though, for a lot of us that have to lip read, because we can't really write and lip read at the same time. But go ahead and try that. All right, and I'll talk to you tomorrow. Last day tomorrow. Make sure you comment in the group. Bye.